Well, a good Sunday evening to you. I'm Fox 26 meteorologist John Dawson. This is our tropical update where we get a chance to really dive into things and talk more in depth about what's happening in the tropics. And usually we're focused on the Atlantic basin. And we've got what we might refer to in the business as breaking news, as the National Hurricane Center, as of 4 p.m. Central Time, is now issuing alerts on Potential Tropical Cyclone FIVE. It's one of our favorites, the Potential Tropical Cyclones FIVE, because it is expected to become at least a tropical depression and eventually into a tropical storm very soon, but not quite ready yet. But by labeling this as a potential tropical cyclone, we can now get the full suite of products from the National Hurricane Center, and that's going to be able to get people ready who need to be getting ready, and we're going to see that that definitely includes portions of the Caribbean. So this is what we've been following for the last several days. This was Invest 98L, and as I mentioned, it's now called Potential Tropical Cyclone FIVE. And this is sort of the track that it's been following. And here's where we've got things happening now. Fairly disorganized overall, but you notice how definitely our computer model is getting to latch on in some agreement here on what's going to be happening over the next 48 hours. And yesterday, if you were watching our update, you noticed that eventually we began to see a little bit of a track to the north. And our models were not quite as in agreement as they are now. Some of them had them going a little bit further to the west and then to the north. Some of them a little bit earlier to the north, starting to the east a little bit earlier. And while they're not just right on top of each other, these are pretty close as far as what we're looking at. And so the National Hurricane Center also beginning to lay out their official forecast cone, and we're going to begin to see that that does match up pretty well with what we're seeing. Also in some of the discussions from the Hurricane Center is the talk of this dry air that's kind of getting pulled into the system, probably what's slowing down the development right now. And part of that dry air does include some of the Saharan dust that's out there. So for the most beneficial development of FIVE, it's going to be if it can kind of get in this gap here where we see a little bit less of that dust. That's going to be helpful for it. We'll see how things unfold as we're moving forward. And before I really dive in and show you a little bit more of the official products from the National Hurricane Center, I do just want to point out that while we've got FIVE now, again, was a tropical wave, it's still just broad area of low pressure. We are already continuing to see more waves coming in off of the African coast, and this is going to be why our forecasts for the rest of the season, the outlooks, if you will, are going to be very high numbers overall. So this is the official forecast cone from the National Hurricane Center for Potential Tropical Cyclone FIVE. And you'll notice that those winds, again, about 30 miles an hour, moving pretty quick at 21 miles an hour. And it's still pretty much way out in the Atlantic. But by this time tomorrow, Monday afternoon, we are expecting it to be a tropical storm. And then it's going to stay that way for another 24 hours. And then things get a little bit more interesting once we get into the midweek, so around Wednesday, because that's when we're going to have a lot more interaction with land. Over here, we're still just dealing with water. We get to the Leeward Islands. That's definitely going to be a problem for them concerning rainfall. There'll be some gusty winds. You can see the winds up to probably 50 miles an hour, but it's mainly the rainfall that's going to be a bit of a problem. And then as we get in a little bit further, we begin to see the winds get to hurricane strength, and that is also going to be when we're sort of watching for that track to the north, starting to interact a little bit more with larger land masses. If it gets that track going up to the north pretty quick, then I think we'll see that intensification jump up for sure to a Category 2, and we might even be able to see this system become even stronger as it were to continue on further into the track. Now, all the folks in the southeast of the U.S., while we like what we're seeing right now, we're not completely letting our guard down. There could be some minor changes to this track or maybe even some bigger changes, but overall, we have a front that's sort of going to end up kind of falling apart, helping to create a little bit of a boundary to push this to the north. High pressure over the Atlantic also helping to kind of draw that in. So all of that unfolding right now is how we're seeing things, but needs to be monitored, need to be watched. So just continue to kind of keep an eye on things as you're moving through the week. This is going to be the American model. It pretty much represents kind of what we've been talking about with somewhere that a consistency in the modeling, and also from that forecast from the National Hurricane Center, a little bit of a swirl here. That's where we're looking at right now, the system, and then we get a little bit of heavier rain. By the time we get to Monday, if you'll remember, we already have it at a tropical storm, and then some of those heavier rains begin to make its way in and into the Caribbean, and then here on Wednesday is when we could be at hurricane strength, depending on how everything unfolds, and then possibly even a Category 2 hurricane is what we talked about once we get into Thursday, maybe even stronger, approaching that major hurricane status of a Category 3 or higher. So I talked about those forecasts, those outlooks for the entire season of both the Colorado State University as well as NOAA, the kind of the two most looked at forecasts have been updated recently, and here's the numbers. So not really any major changes, still very high overall, and we'll see these numbers climb. So this is why we're expecting to just continue to see a parade of activity in the Atlantic as we continue through the rest of August. Currently, we're at 4. These forecasts are more or less in the lower 20s, so we're going to continue to kind of keep things happening. And remember, even an average season, that fourth named storm normally happens around this time of the year, right when we begin to get to the 12th or the 14th, something like that. In August is when we would normally have that fourth named storm. So we're kind of ahead of schedule already, and then these numbers really pick up quite quickly as we move through August and into September. So that's going to be the expectations, just continuing to have something to talk about, at least one tropical system to talk about just about every day as we're moving forward with things. And we're definitely going to make these seasonal averages, and then we'll be approaching these seasonal outlooks, these very high numbers. So glad you're with me today. Again, if you're in the United States, we're not finished with this system. Oh, and I think I forgot to mention the name of the storm. This is going to end up being Ernesto, is what we're going to be end up naming this system. So Ernesto is going to be happening this week, and then we'll see how things move forward. If you're in the United States, glad you're watching. Always feel free to leave a comment below in the YouTube, and we're glad that we're seeing the track as it is. We're not completely done with Ernesto at this point. If you're in the Leeward Islands or you're over into the Bahamas, definitely keeping an eye on this quite closely, and we'll see how it's going to go as far as those winds, those strong winds, and how that's going to happen. We still have probably another 48 hours before our confidence really gets high on where this is going to track for sure. We expect that you'll be back here though tomorrow to get the latest on what's happening, and that will be again a little bit after 4 p.m. Central Time. We'll plan to see you then.